Nicholas Cruz, referred to as the shooter hereafter, enters Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Upon entry, he immediately turns into a stairwell. He is equipped with a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, as well as hundreds of rounds of ammunition, all stored in a rifle case. As the shooter puts on a vest containing his ammunition, he encounters student Chris McKenna, who he tells to leave. McKenna runs out of the stairwell through the side door. The shooter exits the stairwell and raises his rifle, but the rifle doesn't fire. He then briefly lowers the weapon to inspect it. The shooter raises his rifle again and fires as students are in the hallway. The shooter kills Martin Duque, Luke Hoyer, and Gina Montalto, who are outside of room 1215, and injures Ashley Baez, who runs to the alcove of the women's restroom. The fire alarm is activated throughout the campus due to dust falling from the ceiling tiles. The shooter moves to the alcove of room 1216 and fires through the window of the door. At the same time as the shooting stops, Baez runs from the alcove of the women's restroom to room 1210. The shooter then moves to the alcove of room 1214 and fires through the window of the door. He shoots 6 students in this room, killing Nicholas Dorette and Helena Ramsey, and injuring Isabel Checker, Samantha Fuentes, Samantha Grady, and Daniela Maniscal. The shooter moves back to the alcove of room 1216 and shoots through the window again. In total, the shooter has shot 8 students in this room, killing Alyssa Alhadef, Elena Petty, and Alex Schachter, and injuring William Olson, Genesis Valentine, Justin Colton, Alexander Dorette, and Kashava Managapuram. At this time, campus monitor Chris Hickson enters the building. The shooter exits the alcove and turns, shooting Hickson as he runs towards the shooter. The shooter briefly stops in the alcove of room 1214. During this time, Hickson moves across the hallway and conceals himself behind a wall. The shooter moves to the alcove of room 1213 and shoots through the window of the door. He shoots 4 students, killing Carmen Shentrup and injuring Samantha Mayer, Madeline Wilford, and Ben Wikander. At this point, the fire alarm is shut off. The shooter moves further west down the hallway. As he passes Hickson, the shooter fires additional rounds, fatally injuring him. The shooter moves towards the stairwell. At the same time, campus monitor Aaron Feiss is moving towards the same stairwell. The shooter and Feiss enter the stairwell simultaneously. The shooter immediately raises his rifle and fires, killing Feiss. The shooter ascends the stairwell to the second floor and exits the stairwell. The second floor has treated the situation as an active shooter situation, so nobody is in the hallways and are all hidden in classrooms. The shooter briefly looks into rooms 1229 and 1230, then moves farther east down the hallway. The shooter then moves to the alcove of room 1231, shooting through the window of the door. Nobody in this room was injured. The shooter moves farther down the hallway, looking into room 1233, then moves to room 1234 and fires rounds through the window of the door. Nobody in this room was injured. The shooter moves farther east down the hallway, entering the stairwell. The shooter sends the stairwell to the 3rd floor, then exits the stairwell. The 3rd floor has treated the situation as a fire evacuation due to the fire alarm, and are returning to their classrooms, some of which have locked behind them. The shooter turns and fires at students and teachers. He kills teacher Scott Beagle and injures teacher Stacy Lipple. Lipple and Beagle were shot while holding their doors open for their students. At this point, students farther down the hall, who were trying to get into teacher Ernie Raspierski's classroom, hide in various locations, with most ducking into the alcove of room 1249. The shooter fires at students in the hallway, injuring Joaquin Oliver as he ran to the men's restroom, Meadow Pollock as she crossed the hall, and Anthony Borges, who collapses in the hallway. The shooter turns around and walks east, retrieving a magazine from his vest. At the same time, Raspierski peeks out from the alcove of room 1249, then runs to the alcove of the adjacent room to check if it was unlocked. The shooter turns back and inserts his magazine. At the same time, Raspierski runs for the stairwell and tells his students to follow him. 10 of the students do, while the rest stay. The shooter fires at Raspierski and the fleeing students, injuring Kyle Lehman and Mary Kabachenko, and killing Jamie Gutenberg, who makes it into the stairwell but collapses, and Pierre Wang, who held the door open for his classmates. Meadow Pollock, who was injured, moves towards Kara Loughran and presses her body against Loughran. The shooter moves to the alcove of room 1249, shooting Pollock and Loughran simultaneously, killing them both. The shooter moves to the alcove of the men's restroom, shooting Joaquin Oliver again, killing him. The shooter moves farther down the hallway. He attempts to enter the stairwell, but Raspierski was preventing the door from being opened. The shooter leaves the stairwell area and enters the teacher's lounge. The shooter attempts to shoot out of the windows, which overlook a lot of the campus, as well as students who are evacuating from the earlier fire alarm. However, because the glass is storm resistant, the bullets don't travel well, and nobody is injured. The shooter leaves the teacher's lounge and moves towards the stairwell. At the same time, Raspierski runs down the stairwell to the 2nd floor, where he conceals himself in a locked room. The shooter enters the stairwell and sets down his firearm, as well as his vest carrying ammunition. The shooter then runs down the stairs and exits out the first floor hallway doors. In total, he has killed 17 people and injured an additional 17 people.